The following is a New Jersey Network special report, Governor Florio's budget address.
The budget situation is serious. The options include possible layoffs, possible additional cuts in state spending, and possible tax increases.
You can start eliminating programs, you can start eliminating employees, and you can start raising revenues, and there are probably other things that we'll be exploring as well.
The truth is there's an economic slowdown through the Northeast. It's not as bad in New Jersey. We don't have the problem they do in New York. We don't have the problem they do in Connecticut. This is a temporary problem.
I said they were going to be out of money by January. Before Governor Kane left office. I was wrong by 4 months. I think we'll be out by April.
We have a situation that is unprecedented. There is no governor who has ever come in charged with the responsibility of forming their own budget for the next year that has been faced with a budget shortfall for the current year.
I'm Kent Manahan, and this is a New Jersey Network special report, Governor Jim Florio's budget address. The governor will address a joint session of the legislature in just a few minutes with his official spending plan for the new fiscal year. And as outlined in State Treasurer Douglas Berman's budget briefing yesterday, the word is tax hikes and spending cuts. In today's formal address, which Florio has delayed until the latest date the Constitution will allow, we'll hear about raising and extending the sales tax, increasing the income tax on a graduated scale that will slide from 3.5% to 7%, and cutting state jobs and state spending. It all amounts to a $12.1 billion budget, a plan designed to eliminate the projected deficit by raising almost $1.5 billion in new tax money. And joining me in the studio today, New Jersey Network News senior correspondent Michael Aron. Michael, you've certainly been keeping a close eye on this whole budget process. During the gubernatorial campaign, the talk of new taxes was taboo. What happened?
Ken, I think a couple of things happened. I don't think that Jim Florio really knew last fall how serious a budget problem he'd face. At the same time, I think he chose not to focus on the severity of the problem, even as it existed at that time. He was so intent upon not committing the sin he had committed 8 years earlier, which was admitting he might have to raise taxes, that he simply chose not to focus on some serious problems that were beginning to become evident last fall, that certainly have become much more evident in the past 4 or 5 months, exacerbated by a worsening economy throughout the Northeast. With word of what the budget will include out in the open now, we've certainly heard enough grumbling from the Republicans, and even before the Republicans were grumbling about the thought of new taxes. But with the Democrats in control of the legislature, can we expect that this budget will sail on through? Not the way his car insurance plan sailed through. That sailed through almost unbelievably quickly and with very little rancor, very little bickering, except a little bit of partisan bickering. This is going to be much tougher. Many more groups are going to get hurt by this budget. Lawmakers who have to run for re-election a year and a half from now are going to think long and hard before they vote for tax increases. Be that as it may, I think that the position that the Republican legislators appear to be staking out for themselves doesn't have all that much credibility to it. It looks like pure politics. What they're saying, if we're reading what they're saying in the morning papers, and maybe I haven't understood their argument fully, but they seem to be saying Florio cannot raise taxes this much, and at the same time, he can't cut state spending, particularly education funding, as much. We have to cut here, Michael, because we've got to go over to the State Museum right now, where the governor will be giving his budget address in just a few minutes. And let's join Larry Stuelpnagel, who's there. Larry? Thank you very much, Kent. We're waiting now for the governor's arrival. We're also waiting for the arrival of some of the legislators here, both Assemblymen and Senate members, so the governor can deliver his budget address to the special joint session of the legislature. Joining me now while we wait is the Speaker of the New Jersey Assembly, Joseph Doria. Assemblyman Doria, you've had a chance to look at this budget. You've had a chance to even look at the governor's remarks. What do you think of this, particularly the $1.4 billion in new taxes that Florio is talking about?
Well, let me say we have a very serious problem here that's been bequeathed to us by the Kane administration. The amount of deficit that Governor Florio has inherited is unheard of in the past. We have to take drastic measures, unfortunately. I think that the governor's message today is a good beginning. The most important part of the message is the need for major structural change in our tax system, the need for property tax reform. The only way we can do that is by passing broad-based state taxes, which will then help the local property taxpayer alleviate their payment of taxes on a local level. So this is a total package. We have an opportunity. I look upon this challenge as an opportunity to begin to lessen the dependence of the state on property taxes and to deal with the deficit that unfortunately we've inherited from the Kane administration.
You called this a good beginning. How would you change the governor's plan?
Well, I think we have to look at more of the details. I wouldn't necessarily change it. I think it has to be elaborated on. I think we have to go into more detail on exactly what each of these taxes will do, and also what the property tax reform measure is. The priority here is property tax reform. The secondary purpose is to deal with the deficit, in my opinion.
Can you go for giving up some of the popular things in this budget, such as the tax rebate program for homeowners?
We're going to have to seriously look at that. Obviously, it's going to be difficult, but if we feel that we will be getting true property tax reform, we will be dealing with the structural question of taxes in the state, I think we'll be able to move ahead.
What about the trimming in state government? All but two departments taking up to 15% hits. Is that something that you can also support?
Well, I support the trimming of the state government. I think that we have been growing too fast, that the government was out of control under Governor Kane. We were spending too quickly. The revenues weren't enough. I support it. I even think we should be cutting corrections.
Speaker Joseph Doria, thank you for joining us here. We'll be listening to the governor's remarks. As you just heard over the loudspeaker next to me here, that is Senate President John Lynch. He is calling this body to order. Apparently, we do have all of our people here from both the Senate and the Assembly to listen to the governor's special joint address. There are some preliminary activities that go on prior to the governor's arrival. So until that happens, let's go back now to the studio and Kent Manahan. And as we see there, Commissioner, how are you? As we see there, we had the Senate President John Lynch, and he is calling the body to order. In just a few moments, they will be calling the governor's office to have the governor come over. I think the speech is about 4 or 5 minutes from now. And until then, let's go back to the studio now to Kent and Michael.
All right, Larry, we'll gladly continue our discussion here in our Trenton studio awaiting the governor's budget address. Michael, you know, one thing with all of the criticism that has gone on about the tax situation and the thought of new taxes, during the campaign, though, Governor Florio, elect at that time, or a candidate at that time, never really said never to no new taxes.
He came as close as you can come to saying never. He said, I have no intention of raising taxes. He said, I see no need for new taxes, but you're right, he did stop short of saying, I'll never raise taxes. His opponent, Jim Corder, said, I won't raise taxes, predicted that Florio would raise taxes, and now I saw one newspaper story this morning where Corder is quoted as saying, I told you so.
You've been a long-time observer of what goes on behind closed doors and in front of those doors at the State House in Trenton. Do you think that the Democrats were really all that surprised at the budget situation as they claim to be now that they're trying to lay this whole thing to rest at the Kane administration's feet?
That's a good question, and that's the jockeying that's going on right now and is going to be going on for months, is who knew what when, who was lying, if anyone was lying. I don't think we'll ever know. I think it's a little fruitless to try to figure out, actually, because I don't think anybody is ever going to admit that they were lying. I think it's a situation, a budget was passed last June 30th that everybody knew had certain problems in it, and I think ever since then the problem has gotten steadily and steadily more serious. And who knew what when is a good question, but I just don't know how we're ever going to know the answers.
But no one can really campaign on a platform of raising taxes these days,
You can't do that anymore. No, you can't.
It's gone by the wayside.
Yes,
so are we victims then, we the electorate, are we victims then of this kind of campaigning, and that we never really know the real picture, or are we just supposed to assume that when we hear no new taxes, that means likely to be new taxes?
Yeah, well, I've learned, I think, watching New Jersey politics, never to underestimate the intelligence of the electorate. I think that they now know what is a promise and what is a hard promise and what is a soft promise, and that they can read through verbiage of that sort. And were we victimized? We're victimized every day by advertisements and slogans and false promises, and maybe we were victimized here. I think it's interesting also that the Kaine administration is taking such a trashing at the moment. Perhaps rightly so. Perhaps they didn't fess up to the seriousness of the problem. Governor Kaine kept saying right up until the day he left office, there's going to be a surplus in this budget I'm leaving you, Governor Florio, and there's a $500 million shortfall. So we see now in retrospect why Kaine wanted a Republican to succeed him so much. His legacy would be looking so much better today if a Republican were dealing with these problems and shaping the public's perception of what had gone on. Then his legacy looks with Jim Florio and Doug Berman saying that what the Kaine administration did bordered on fiscal irresponsibility. We're about to hear what the governor is going to say in his budget address. You and I have both seen a copy of it. We've seen Doug Berman's briefing yesterday, the state treasurer. It certainly seems that the governor has not shied away from the tough choices in this budget. Yeah, that's for sure. And I was surprised to see him. I didn't see it firsthand. I saw a video the other day of him having lunch with State House reporters. He seemed that day like a man very serene, very calm, almost proud of making the tough choices here. This is a big gamble for him. This will have a lot, the outcome of this fight could have a lot to say about how his first term is thought of, what his chances for re-election are 3.5 years from now. And yet, this is the same Jim Florio who tackled the car insurance problem 6 days after taking office. This is more hands-on, and this time we get some bitter medicine with the tough decisions he's had to make. In a first administration, you certainly have to think about re-election. It's never too early to think about that. Isn't this the politically wise thing to do for Governor Florio if he has to raise taxes, to do it early, get it over with? I think you're right. I think it is. Be that as it may, he still is saving another tax for about a year from now, the income tax. This budget he's going to present today calls for a hike in the sales tax. He's going to talk today about a subsequent hike in the income tax. It's interesting that he chose not to do that one now, that he's going to, in effect, tax the poor before he taxes the rich. A sales tax falls disproportionately on low and moderate income people. An income tax is graduated and is more progressive. They need the money now, though, and I think they, as Berman explained it yesterday, they see doing the sales tax now as somehow politically more doable and producing revenue more quickly. The income tax they'll present as part of a large property tax reform scheme that has a few questionable areas in it, but it's what editorial writers in this state have been calling on governors to do for years. I'm being told that the governor will be appearing shortly to begin his address. But in the meantime, Michael, you and I have been discussing the fact that maybe this is a rather simplistic approach on the part of Governor Florio to this budget, in that, except for the two departments, Human Services and Corrections, which will get an increase in funding, all the other departments seem to fall into that 12 to 15% generally category of cuts. You agree or disagree? If you're saying simplistic in a critical way, I don't think I would agree with that. First of all, he has not imposed one of these Graham-Rudman type across the board 12% cuts on every single department. If you look at these page after page of tables of numbers that were handed out yesterday, you see that some departments take what look like a 5, 6, 7% cut. Others take more like a 14, 15% cut, as if some thought went into how much they have to cut. It's also interesting that Florio wants to, I believe, leave most of the decisions on how to cut up to the commissioners. That protects him from being associated with some of the unpopular cuts that are about to be made. It also is said to be good management style, or they're saying it's good management style, if you let the managers themselves shrink their own departments as they see fit rather than micromanage that from the governor's office. The governor has to have disappointed a number of people, including environmentalists and public school officials in the state with this budget, among others. People are going to get hurt. Constituency groups are going to get hurt. Homeowners are going to get hurt. That homestead rebate has been a popular program over the years. And to withdraw it is to not only take a political risk, it's also to in effect, make any promise of property tax reform a year from now a $200 less valuable promise, because property owners are going to lose $200 before they save anything. You said schools, DEP gets cut, yes, although somehow one imagines that the environmental governor will continue to put a good face on whatever his environmental policies are. Transit fares are going to go up. Retail merchants are going to be upset with a hike in the sales tax and a broadening of the sales tax. The sales tax in this state, if this tax passes, will be 7%. In Pennsylvania, it's 6%. Somebody buying a $500 appliance would save $5 by crossing the river to buy it in Pennsylvania. Will people do that? I don't know. I don't think so. But.
Other than corrections and human services, which might be happy in light of all the other cuts with this budget, because they're in for an increase, although not what they wanted. I guess you could also say that the cities might delight a little bit. Perhaps delight is too strong a word. Might be happy about this budget because there's no real cut in the distressed cities aid.
There's no real cut in the distressed cities aid. That's true. But those cities always say they need more than that amount, that $120 million. And they might be losing revenues, state aid revenues, in other ways, too.
All right, Michael, I think we are ready to go back to Larry Stuelpnagel at the State Museum in Trenton to hear the governor's budget address. Larry?
That's right, Kent. The governor has just arrived here at the State Museum in Trenton. He's making his way through the crowd right now, shaking hands with different legislative leaders.
Governor of the state of New Jersey,
He's coming up.
Jim Florio.
That is Senate President John Lynch introducing the governor as he is about to deliver a budget that he calls harsh, one he doesn't like, but one that he's going to have to, it's a road he says that the state is going to have to travel. Right now he and the leadership, the legislative leadership, are pausing for the print photographers to have their picture taken. The governor is about ready to give his address. That's his wife Lucinda, who also accompanied him at his State of the State message and his auto insurance message. So far, the governor is getting a standing ovation for his budget message.
Thank you.
We'll see how much applause he gets when he starts talking about the tax cuts. Let's go up on stage now and Governor Jim Florio.
Thank you all. Thank you very, very much. I hope you still feel that way when I finish. Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, we've come here today to begin a process, to set out on a journey that will say a great deal about what kind of a state we want for our children and for our children's children. I'm not promising that this will be an easy journey or a painless one, but many a journey is worth taking because of what lies at the journey's end. You might remember me in the inaugural speech. Was that only 2 months ago? Yeah. Talking about my grandparents. My grandparents, just as I suspect many of your parents or grandparents, left their homes to sail across the ocean to a new world. They didn't expect a pleasure cruise. They sweated it out in the crowded steerage compartments of leaky ships. They did it because of what waited for them at the end of the journey. What waited was opportunity. Opportunity for us and for our families and those who come after us is what New Jersey will keep providing, if we are willing to take decisive action. Let me take a moment to sketch for you what I think we all want. We all want New Jersey to be like in years ahead. We want a state with schools that are second to none, turning out skilled, qualified workers, where we can be sure that everybody gets a chance. We want New Jersey to have clean, fresh water for us to drink. We want pure air to breathe. And of course, we want a beautiful shore for all of us to be able to enjoy. We want cities and towns where the American dream of owning a home is alive for our children as it was for all of us. We want a leaner, more efficient government, run like our families run their households, spending no more than it has to and spending no more than it has, but a government that is there to help the people who need to be helped. We want a state where taxpayers' dollars are used wisely and are properly accounted for, where taxes are fair, and where we ease the oppressive burden of local property taxes. A state that has built a foundation to help us with the bad economic times when they come. Friends, that's a New Jersey that's worth fighting for and worth having. It is the New Jersey that I pledge that the government that I lead will be striving for. But those goals, those values, are not going to happen in a vacuum. They won't happen if we keep on avoiding the tough choices. Today, we are confronted by harsh realities and hard decisions. The time has come to face them. As one of my heroes, the great heavyweight Joe Louis, used to say, you can run, but you can't hide. So I want to discuss with you today the steps that I believe we need to take to get through the next year, fiscal 1991, and to make sure that 1992 marks a bright new beginning. The budget I'm proposing for the fiscal year starting this July 1st is harsh. I don't like it. It contains measures tougher than a compassionate people should have to take. It frustrates our ability to make government the catalyst for change that I believe that it should be. But the one-shot fixes, the refusals to face reality that went into the budget under which we now live, the budget I've inherited, would be short-sighted if we applied them again, and we won't. You know as well as I do that in the last 8 years alone, the size of our state budget has doubled. The budget I'm proposing shatters that mold. The budget for the fiscal year starting July 1st, 1990, will be smaller, not bigger, than the one before it. This is going to require sacrifice, but it must be done. We have to change our ways. My proposal will mean a real balanced budget. We have cut more than $1 billion in spending from what was requested last year. We will continue to trim the size of state government. Except for an essential increase in the size of the corrections department staff, the overall state workforce will be smaller. Most of the positions that we cut will be middle-level managers, not the people directly providing services. As I've said, we have cut more than $1 billion from the spending requests of the previous administration. Yet, astounding as it may sound, when that cutting is done, when the efficiencies are put into place, we still fall short of a balanced budget. So I'm proposing to balance that budget, as we must, and that the way that we're going to do it is to raise and broaden the base of our state sales tax. By adding 1 cent on the dollar and closing loopholes, we can have a balanced budget, and that's, of course, the requirement of the law. We will not, I want to add very quickly, extend the sales tax to cover such basic necessities as food and clothing. I said that this would balance the budget, and it will. Not lavishly, not even comfortably, far from it. It will still be a budget dictated by the realities of a state that has unwisely spent its surpluses and failed to set aside enough to get us through hard times. State aid to our schools will increase, but not by enough. There'll be fare increases for train and bus riders. Students will pay more to go to our state colleges. We will not be able to afford the homestead rebate for next year. This is a tight budget, but we have no choice. Despite the hardships that this budget will require, I believe there is one area where we must go forward with renewed energy and commitment. We can't let our children's education suffer. As I suspect many of you know, I'm a high school dropout. I'm someone who came close to losing his way. I know the despair of almost being shut out. I know the exhilaration of learning. There are so many children across this state who need to feel that exhilaration. And so, even in a bare bones budget, I want to propose 3 important programs. First, no child in this state should have to try to learn in a classroom where the roof leaks and the windows are broken. I'm therefore proposing what I call the 3 R's bond program: rebuilding, refurbishing, and revitalizing our school buildings so that the proper setting exists for learning to take place, so that schools become true community centers. If we commit ourselves to this, we'll provide $600 million for 90% matching grants to fund school construction and renovation over the next 4 years. State-of-the-art laboratories, modern libraries, safe and comfortable classrooms. They'll mean a lot to our children. And because we will put emphasis on facilities that also can be used by families and by the elderly at all hours, we'll be putting our schools in the forefront of rebuilding our sense of community. Second, we must rekindle our investment in the early years of childhood, the years that count the most in building character and instilling the values of success. I'm calling for an appropriation of $5 million, which together with money promised by the federal government will let us double the number of children in Head Start programs here in New Jersey. You know this. There's no program that has ever meant more to improving the lives of young children in need. No program has ever offered more benefits in social and economic gains down the road. Third, I want to take action to make sure our state, and indeed our nation, is competitive with the rest of the world. I therefore call upon you to set aside $1 million for a math, science achievement program that will help our students put themselves and our nation back in the forefront of an area where we have gone from being the world's leaders to followers. Now, $1 million is not a lot of money, but what makes this program so exciting is that we will go to the businesses of New Jersey in search of matching grants. And I'm pleased to announce that this particular public-private partnership has already been joined by Nabisco, and I'm looking forward to many more corporate citizens finding ways to recognize the stake that they have in our children's future. This will be the first of many such partnerships to build a better New Jersey. Along with these proposals, I will be calling for another fundamental educational change. As we have struggled to reform our schools in recent years, we've had successes. But we have also expanded state bureaucracy at the expense of community initiative. It's time to cut the red tape for our best school districts. At times we have shackled the best school districts and taken time and resources away from helping those districts that are in trouble. Soon I will submit to you my proposals for reducing the costs in time and money to the top school districts by allowing more local discretion at the same time that we maintain high standards. Our educational goal should be excellence, not mere compliance. A balance will be struck between accountability to the state and the common sense reality that in so many cases, our communities know best how to provide good quality education. As I said earlier, our job in preparing a balanced, fair budget has been made more difficult by the out-of-control past spending that's occurred and the failure to use past surpluses for what they were intended. We've eaten our seed corn. As any farmer would tell you, that's a mistake. I have two proposals to turn around that situation. We must institute a real rainy day fund. Along the lines of what Senator Weiss has been talking about, as sort of a voice in the wilderness for entirely too long. In any year when revenues come in above expectations, The money will be set aside, and it will be used in years when we take in less than we expected. It's just common sense. And second, there should be a state spending cap. A limit on the year-to-year increase in all state spending. These two actions will put us in a position to face up to reality. They will take us down the sound, prudent path of solving a crucial structural problem. The problem is this: the amount of money our state keeps spending continues to go up in good times and in bad. It goes up faster than our ability to pay. And that's just a recipe for disaster. For millions of people in this state, it doesn't take a law to make them spend no more than they take in. That's life. That's just good common sense. You can't live like a millionaire if you're not one. My family has always lived by those rules, and I suspect your families have lived by them as well. But we haven't been using common sense recently. We haven't lived by those simple rules. And as a result, we've had to take emergency steps to enable us to get through the immediate budget crisis of this very, very moment. This crisis involves the fiscal year that we are in now, the one that ends this June 30th. As you've heard me say before, the budget under which we are living today is seriously out of balance. It's been reported that inaccurate, overly rosy predictions, as well as an economic downturn, have left us with a $590 million shortfall. We're in the hole. I acted in a dramatic fashion to make sure that the state doesn't run out of money. In consultation with the leaders of the legislature, I'm prepared to cut more than $405 million for this year out of the budget. We've cut out state projects, frozen salaries, taken back state cars that never should have gone out there in the first place. We're working hard to gain credibility with the hard-working men and women of New Jersey. We're changing priorities. We're putting an end to business as usual. I know that putting this year's budget back into balance is an unusually serious problem. No one's ever had to do that before. And I believe that leadership, to do that or anything else, means setting an example. So I'm announcing today that I will take a 10% cut in my own salary for the rest of the fiscal year, and my cabinet will take a 5% cut in their salaries. I would note for the record that the cabinet is reluctantly applauding. I said at the beginning that what we do today will say a lot about the future of our state. So I want to make it very clear that I do not believe it is proper for me to come before you today with a plan for next year and nothing more. If we really want to make a difference, we have to take hold of our fate and start to plan ahead. Take steps even beyond the rainy day fund to make sure that when I come before you a year from now, we will have gotten off of this fiscal roller coaster that we've been on for too long. And we must right a fundamental wrong, the wrong of our inequitable property tax system. I want to use this office to make fair what is unfair. The way we pay for schools in this state does a disservice to our school children and to the property taxpayers and the homeowners of New Jersey. And so I propose a bold step to help both groups. Their futures should not be held hostage to our unfair, antiquated property tax system. I think it's worth reflecting for a moment on just how fragile the American dream has become. It's only in the last 40 years or so that we have become a nation where families like ours have owned their own homes. Today, that dream is threatened. I will not soon forget a gentleman who Lucinda and I met at a picnic in Elizabeth. He was in his early 60s and he was crying as he spoke to the two of us. It was an embarrassing moment for him, I'm sure, shedding tears in the presence of strangers. But he wanted to tell us something. He wanted us to know that he had owned his home for years and even paid off the mortgage, but that he was in danger of losing his home because he could no longer afford his property taxes. Property taxes have gone up 108%. That's $4.5 billion in the past 8 years in this state. More than $3.1 billion just in these last 4 years alone. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not acceptable. Our sons and our daughters are finding home ownership beyond their reach. Many of them have no choice but to leave our state. That's not acceptable. Our property tax system is eating away at the American dream. And as oppressive as property taxes are for homeowners, that's how unfair they are for our kids in schools. All too often, the quality of their education is determined by the wealth of their community. And that's not acceptable either. It is in our hands to do something. I have 3 proposals. First, I believe we have an obligation to change the way we deliver state aid to schools. I'll be sending up a plan to establish a foundation level of support to provide a quality education for every child in New Jersey. If a school district can't, with a fair and moderate rate of taxation provide that money, then the state should make up the difference. Second, I propose that the state should pay for its obligations, not push them on to others. I want the state to take over the cost of welfare benefits, foster care, and other social service programs now paid for by our counties and our municipalities. We also want the state to take over the costs of all patients in state and county psychiatric hospitals and all other state institutions. As many of you know, the state and the counties now have an elaborate process for billing each other back and forth. It's wasteful, it's inefficient, we ought to end it. Third, we need new, meaningful property tax relief. I propose we put a lid on property taxes and provide $400 million in relief for the people who need it most. Under my proposal, no family in New Jersey with an income of less than $65,000 a year will have to pay more than 5% of that income in property taxes. Where property taxes exceed that level, the state will pick up the difference up to an amount of $500 per year. Now, the amount of money that New Jersey takes in from income taxes today cannot pay for these important reforms. It won't give our kids the education they need. It can't give our communities what they need to bring relief to homeowners from local property taxes. And so, to bring back tax justice to our people, we must make our income tax fairer and more progressive. Accordingly, I will propose that starting on the 1st of January, 1991, the tax will be more progressive for people making more than $55,000 per year. No one making less than $55,000 per year will pay more than they do now. There will be a 7% top rate for the wealthiest of our citizens, and 3/4 of the money raised by what I'm proposing will come from those who are making more than $100,000 per year. If we do this, if you and I take this important step, we will be doing more, much more, than ever has been done before to deal with the worst abuses of the property tax system. I know that in weeks ahead, you will debate and you will deliberate about what it is that I've said here today, and I welcome that. In this legislature, there are many experts on all of the matters that I've talked about. My branch of government certainly has no monopoly on good ideas. But let me begin to respond even before you begin to consider. Some of you may be saying that I'm asking too much. Some may say it's unrealistic or unworkable. I think they're wrong. I'm new to this job, but I'm not new to government. I know that real leadership means determining what is politically possible
and then doing more. I have always believed that it's only when you push at the edges that you excel. I want a New Jersey that keeps its commitments and then some. I want a New Jersey that doesn't say no to better schools and to the dream of home ownership. I want a New Jersey that says yes to its future. I am asking that we do things differently. And change isn't always easy. I know that. But I've traveled up and down this state enough to know that this isn't just about taxes and budgets. It's about the hard-earned money, about the lives, about the values of the men and women of New Jersey. These are matters that I know that you must and will debate with thought and care, and that's good. In the long run, at the end of our journey, what we start here today will mean a government that is leaner but better, a state that shows its concern for its young by investing in their future, by the fairest and most equitable means. It will mean, finally, a property tax that is fairer and less of a burden to our citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't get to choose the times in which we live, but we do get the chance to determine how we respond to those times. I'm proposing today that we respond with boldness, with compassion, with honesty, and yes, with courage. And I'm confident that we will. Thank you very much.
Session of the New Jersey Legislature, a joint session of the legislature. It was a budget address that he called harsh and one he didn't like, but one that he had to deliver to briefly, he's walking out of the room now, to briefly go over some of the points of that budget. It's about $12.1 billion, and it proposes $1.4 billion in taxes. It's interesting to note that during the governor's 30-minute address, he was interrupted about 22 times.
Please be seated for just a couple of minutes.
For applause. I'm going to wrap it up for right now. The joint session has got a little business to take care of. Let's go back to the studio to Kent and Michael.
All right, Larry, and of course we'll be rejoining Larry at the State Museum in Trenton, where Governor Florio has just delivered his budget address with some reaction to today's address. But while we await that, Michael, Aron, and I are here in our Trenton studios at New Jersey Network, and we've been talking about the budget this afternoon. And Michael, did the governor have any other choice?
Well, there are 1,000 ways to skin a cat, and he chose one, and he did it by a combination of spending cuts and tax hikes, and somebody else might have chosen a slightly different combination. What struck me about this particular budget message was, to borrow a word from Jim Florio's last paragraph, bold. It was pretty bold. There's some radical changes proposed here, as radical as his auto insurance plan that we were sitting here talking about 2 months ago. It was also interesting that he focused as much on education as he did. He doesn't have a background or a reputation as an expert on education, but he spent the first half of this address giving his ideas on education, proposing a few programs in education, perhaps trying to live up to his predecessor's legend in that field, and perhaps because of his wife's background, maybe this is a new heartfelt commitment on the part of Jim Florio. That was part one of the speech, education. The second part was this proposal to finally do what, again, editorial writers have been calling for many years, and what the SLRP Commission in this state spent 3 years studying and then proposing, and then it got ignored, and that is to raise income taxes on the wealthy in order to reduce the property tax burden on the less wealthy, and particularly the people on fixed incomes.
Just talking generally about the budget, Michael, we would expect that the people appointed by Jim Florio in his new administration would support this budget, but it might be interesting to find out what the career middle management people, the people who run the nuts and bolts of the departments of state government, might think about this budget, some of whom may be losing their jobs through attrition or otherwise.
It's been a bad year or two for the so-called middle manager in New Jersey. Somehow we've gotten the notion, perhaps through Florio campaign rhetoric, that state government has gotten bloated at the middle management level. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if there are many people in Trenton who do know whether that's true. But middle managers, whoever they may be, have to be running for cover at the moment, because through attrition, through program cuts and elimination of certain responsibilities, that seems to be where the Florio administration is looking to shrink state government.
There are some who've said, and in fact the governor himself said this today in his address, that perhaps the governor is moving too quickly.
He's moving quickly. There's no doubt about that. Once again, this, as you pointed out at the beginning of this broadcast, he had to deliver a budget message by today, and he waited as long as he possibly could.
And it had to be balanced.
It had to be balanced. So whoever was governor had to do something fairly drastic or fairly rash, or to solve a severe hemorrhage. Still, the part of the budget that really looks beyond this June 30th and towards the next budget year, this proposal to raise the income tax on the wealthy in order to reduce property taxes, is very bold and is really going to be controversial. And the person, interestingly, who argues the most eloquently that it's a bad idea to raise income taxes is former Governor Kane, repeatedly in a documentary with you, and we're going to use a piece of it on the news tonight. Governor Kane says that he doesn't know of one example in the country where when you raise income taxes at the state level, you don't end up hurting the business climate in the state. That's something Florio has to guard against. It's something the business community is going to be talking about in the months ahead. It's not a certainty that Florio will get this bold proposal that he laid out here today.
Michael, in your opinion, can state government continue at the same level despite these cuts, these drastic cuts that are being called for in some departments?
By at the same level, do you mean can it continue to provide the same level of service? I don't think so. But if you're cutting state government by 10%, maybe 5% of it can be trimmed in...
Called fat. But, okay.
Yes, efficiencies, tighter rules, less out-of-state travel, and so on and so forth. And maybe 5% will have to be felt by constituency groups who expect services from state government.
All right, Michael, we're going to take a break. This is a New Jersey Network special report, Governor Florio's budget address. We'll be back with some legislative reaction to that address in just a minute. Welcome back to New Jersey Network's coverage of Governor Florio's budget address. I'm Kent Manahan. While we await some legislative reaction to that budget, which Governor Florio has just delivered at the State Museum in Trenton today, I am joined in our New Jersey Network studios by our senior political correspondent, Michael Aron. We've been talking about the budget. The governor himself called this budget lean and mean. I think the people of New Jersey would agree with that characterization.
There will be groups that will be hurt. As we said, transit fares will go up, taxes will go up, the sales tax. Homeowners will lose a rebate they've sort of enjoyed. It's been a little gift in the mail every summer for 14 years. That won't be there this summer. I should emphasize it may be there in subsequent summers. They're not, I think they're not doing away with it entirely forever. They're suspending it for this year. Yeah, it's lean and mean.
As you and I sat here and watched Governor Florio deliver his address, we were both surprised to hear that the governor will be taking a 10% salary cut and his cabinet members will be taking a 5% salary cut. We had not heard any advance word on that.
No, that was a cute gesture, a good gesture probably, a smart gesture, a bit of a gimmick, but I bet you that soundbite is on most news programs tonight. And it was interesting to see the cabinet officers react.
I'm not sure that they were reacting so favorably to that. They hesitated in their applause.
They hesitated before applauding, and then they laughed, and I wonder if they had been forewarned or whether this was sprung on them as a surprise. I couldn't tell from their reaction.
I trust we'll get some of that reaction this afternoon from Larry as he's talking to some of the people down there, and that we are waiting to hear some of the legislative reaction to the governor's address from Larry Stuelpnagel, who was at the State Museum. But Michael, while we wait, is there a political risk here in this budget for the Democrats? We're going into, next year will be a legislative election year. The Democrats are in control of both houses. If this budget does get through, there has to be a risk.
There will be a risk. Anytime you vote for a tax increase and are running against either, if the Democrats end up voting for the taxes and the Republicans end up voting against them, as appears possible from their initial comments, the Democrats are running a risk. At the same time, they run a risk if they don't follow their leader, endorse their leader's plan, and find state government in a shambles a year from now. If they look like, as a party, the majority party, they haven't managed affairs well, that's also a risk. So they have a tough road to hoe, which is why Florio will have a more difficult time getting this through the legislature than his car insurance plan, because Democratic legislators, the majority, will have to think twice before voting for. There's more than just one sales tax they have to vote for. I don't know whether these will be separate bills or whether they'll all be combined into one budget. But if they're separate bills, they could vote yes on one tax and no on the tax that hikes, no on the tax on telephone calls, or no on the tax on oil company receipts, which is going to send, by the way, gasoline prices higher. That's another one of the hidden costs in this budget, or hidden bits of pain. Florio has proposed, it wasn't in his message today, but it's in his formal budget. He's proposed a 2.75% new tax on oil company gross receipts. And the oil companies in the past 24 hours have already announced they're going to pass that on to the consumer at the gas pump.
So the legislators have to think about their own political future. There's absolutely no guarantee that this budget as presented today is going to pass as is.
Absolutely true. At the same time, as we said at the top of this broadcast, the Republican legislators are also in a funny position. On the one hand, they appear to be making political hay. Assembly Minority Leader Chuck Hytien is quoted in this morning's papers as saying, as crowing almost, it's only taken Florio 2 months to raise taxes, the largest increase in state history. And yet, Hytien's party is partly responsible for the problem Florio inherited. At the same time, Hytien's party is bemoaning these cuts, particularly the cut in, or the lack of full funding for education. The Republicans have a funny tightrope that they have to be walking in the 3 months ahead before this budget is passed in the legislature, too. It's going to be interesting.
All right, Michael, I'm told that Larry Stuelpnagel is standing by at the State Museum in Trenton, and he has reaction from some of the Democrats to today's budget address. Larry?
That's right, Kent. We had to wait here a little bit for the reaction because the legislature was appointing a new state auditor. But let's get down to the reaction that we have here. I have joining me the two chairmen of the Appropriations Committees in the Assembly and in the Senate. Let's start with in the Assembly first with Mr. Watson. What do you think the reaction is going to be in your House from your side of the aisle to the governor's message today?
Well, first I would like to say that in view of the fact that the governor has inherited such a horrendous kind of a situation, I thought the governor today delivered a most powerful and encouraging presentation to the people of the state of New Jersey in regards that he's going to be a courageous governor to tackle the problem that we're facing.
The question is now for you gentlemen, though, as he's proposing some tax increases, this is going to take political courage on your part. Are the votes there to vote for these tax increases that the state needs to get out of its current fiscal crisis? And how quickly are you going to move on those? Because time is money with a $590 million shortfall this year.
Well, to tell you the truth, I know that it's going to take us some time to consider all that we have to do. Yes, we're going to have a lot of discussion one way or the other on this, but I know for a fact, and just going around in my caucus alone, that we know the situation that we're in. We know that we're going to have to take some bold and courageous steps, and I think they're ready to do that right now.
All right, Senator Weiss, what's your reaction? Are the votes there for those tax increases that the governor was talking about today just to get you out of this current problem?
I would hope that they will be there. You know, it's very difficult to assess this thing before the bill is even proposed or introduced. But I think that thinking people will understand what the state, what the magnitude of the state problems are. We're some $590 million short at the moment to close out the year. That means that someone had better do something. And you know, as I indicated to you some time ago, there are just a few options left. And to do nothing would be disaster. I think the governor has taken a very courageous stand in proposing both the sales tax and also the income tax, both at one time. I think that I've been here for 13 years now, and that's the first time that's been proposed in such a short period of time.
Do those cuts that he's talking about, too, in state spending, along with those tax increases, does that make the whole package politically palatable to you folks?
Well, the cuts go deep. And there's no question in my mind that there are programs in there that people will want that have been cut. And they're going to indicate that those cuts really hurt. And I believe that. Those cuts really do hurt. But when you don't have the money, you don't have the necessary wherewithal to do it. You have to do something. And again, that goes back to my former statement about options. The governor has very few options to do what he would like to do. I'm sure that he doesn't particularly want to do this. He doesn't seem like the executive that takes great pleasure out of putting more, adding more taxes to the already heavy burden of taxes in the state. But it's come to the point where it's necessary to do it, and I think it'll get done.
Will this will be a question for both of you, is increasing the income tax, is that going to hurt the business climate in the state? That's what we heard for years from Governor Kane.
I don't think so. Not to any great extent. Yes, some people will say, I got hurt by it. But generally speaking, the income tax we have in this state is relatively low in its payments. I think those people over $100,000, I think New Jersey is 36th in the line of how high are taxes for people in that category. That can't hurt too badly.
Senator Watson, your reaction?
Well, I have to agree with Senator Weiss. I must say one thing, that for years that I've felt that our state is lower than the states around us in regards to the income tax. I don't see the people who are making the kind of dollars that we're talking about leaving our state, because our state now is probably one of the fastest growing states that we have in the country, and they're not going to jump from our state going into another state that's not going to give them any better treatment than what we're giving them here.
All right, gentlemen, just very quickly, how soon are you going to start your deliberations on this budget?
I think we have a tentative schedule starting sometime in the early part of April.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. Senator Larry Weiss, Assemblyman John Watson, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We have the Republican here response waiting in the wings. We have the senior members of the two Budget and Appropriations Committee here. We have Senator Jack Ewing, and we have Assemblyman Rodney Frelinghuysen. Gentlemen, quickly, what did you think of the governor's budget message today, and what you saw of the governor's budget that he's presenting to you? Let's start in the Assembly, since that's where the appropriation process begins.
Well, I think the remarks of the governor were to the point. It's a sobering budget. I think on the Republican side of things, we're concerned about some of the new taxes that are proposed. I think we're going to take a very close look at those. If indeed you raise the sales tax and raise $500 million and other expansion of sales taxes, that could have a negative effect on New Jersey's economy and certainly on New Jerseyans' pocketbooks.
Senator Ewing, what's the reaction from Republicans in the Senate?
Well, for talking for myself only, I feel the speech was very well given, and I certainly think he brought out points that have to be looked at. I'm upset about new taxes, but I'm afraid that we're going to have to look at them carefully. We also have to see if we can come up with proposals of new additional cuts within the overall budget, and I think that is behooving to us. But also we have a responsibility to the state of New Jersey to make sure it keeps operating, but not overspending the money. And that's why I think we have to look for cuts. And in the long run, if we have to have some taxes, we certainly want to do as few as we can. But we cannot deny the older people the ability to be able to stay in their homes, which is happening now. They're moving out because of increase in taxes. And also I feel very strongly about the educational system, that we have to seek improvement there. But also we have to make sure that the money is given to the school districts is going to be spent properly. There has to be supervision. We cannot let the Jersey cities occur in other places. That sort of mismanagement, which occurs in other cities now, which will not be taken over, has got to be stopped so that the dollar spent goes to the child in education. Because without an education, the state is going nowheres and the nation's going nowheres.
The governor seemed to be scolding the legislature and the previous administration for the state being in the current fiscal situation that it's in. What's your reaction to that?
Well, certainly the executive branch and the legislative branch contribute to the problem. I think last year we really held the line on new spending proposals after the budget was literally put to bed. One of the key factors in terms of lack of money is a regional problem. New Jersey is not an island, and indeed the receipt of sales tax, income tax, and other major taxes that fuel our economy are way off. And this is something that we have to take into consideration. If indeed we put in new taxes, are they in fact going to have a negative effect on the bottom line as well?
Well, what do you think the impact is going to be? For years, Governor Kane was saying if you increase the income tax, it's going to have a negative impact on the business community here in New Jersey. Do you think that's going to happen if Governor Florio gets his way by increasing the income tax?
Well, I think we have to take a look at that very carefully. It could maybe in some instances, but over the overall picture, we have to take a look at and see whether it really will. I do not know, or people say, oh, if they're going to put the tax up that high, I'm moving out of New Jersey, I'm going to move my business out and everything. But we've got to, as I say, going back to the education, that's the prime thing here nowadays, is trying to help that. And that's why I think if we can find other cuts in the budget to put that money into education rather than increasing taxes, this is the way we should go.
There are many wage earners who together, husband and wife, earn $55,000, and if we're going to start raising the income tax for those with that combined income, I think it's going to have a negative effect. They're not only paying increased insurance costs, but now they're going to be paying additional tax on fuel as well as expanded sales tax, and I think that's going to have a very negative impact on family pocketbooks.
But what about the trade-off that you've got here, and that is that it's going to result in property tax relief, according to the governor?
Well, I wonder whether it really will result in property tax relief. I think it'll take a while to work out the scheme and to deliberate and debate it in the legislature. But if, in fact, there's relief for some, there's going to be misery for others, and that's what I think should concern us.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. We've just heard the Republican reaction now to the governor's budget message from Assemblyman Rodney Frelinghuysen and Senator Jack Ewing. Of course, there'll be much more debate in the days to come. By law, New Jersey must have a new budget in place by midnight June 30th, and if they're not starting their deliberations until April the 1st, this is another budget situation where we could see committees burning the midnight oil and going right down to the wire on the governor's proposed fiscal spending plan for the next year. That's it here from the State Museum in Trenton. Let's go back to the studio now to Kent and Michael.
Larry, thank you. In conclusion, Michael, how do you think this budget will play politically for Jim Florio?
Kent, the image I got of Florio today was of a politician who walks into a casino and all eyes are on him, and he picks up the dice and he rolls the dice, And it's a big gamble. It's a major league gamble, his biggest so far, and he really had no choice. He had to do it or else not step into the casino in the first place and look like a chicken.
All right, Michael, and we'll continue to talk about this on New Jersey Network News this evening. That concludes New Jersey Network's live coverage of the governor's budget address. New Jersey Network will rebroadcast Governor Florio's budget message tomorrow night at 11 o'clock, followed by the legislative reaction hosted by Larry Stuelpnagel. That all starts tomorrow night at 11 on all New Jersey Network channels. And be sure to watch New Jersey Network News as we continue to track the progress of the governor's budget plan. Until then, I'm Kent Manahan. Thank you for being with us.